Today on Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, we're talking about imposter syndrome. Are you doubting your abilities even though you've been trained and know you can do the job? Do you feel like a fraud or phony at work or at home? Is that little voice in the back of your head whispering why you can't do it? Learn about kicking imposter syndrome to the curb as we begin our month focusing on hodgepodge. Do you control your clutter, or does your clutter control you? On Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, we'll teach you awareness as well as action steps to create change in your life. Come on, let's get started. Hey everyone, happy November. These are the first shows being recorded in West Virginia. We are unpacked in our new home and getting organized. My mom passed on August 9th, and I was grateful that I was able to be with her. Tony and my brother and my father and her favorite caregiver were there. I was really grateful for that. My goal had been to keep her at home, and we were with them for 9 weeks. And what my dad shared with me is that if you all hadn't been here, I couldn't have done it. We would have had to taken her. There's a wonderful hospice place called Eliza's Place, but I really, really wanted my mom to be at home. So I'm eternally grateful for that. She's no longer suffering, and I was able to be with her to help her to the next adventure. Having a celebration of life for her. And then Tony and I are taking a long week in the West Virginia mountains, and very grateful for that. I had said I wrote a little post about her on Facebook, and I shared that after my mom died, I kept seeing butterflies. My mom loved butterflies, and I took some of her butterfly decorations, put in my bathroom. And I just share that because I laughed the other day. We walked huge butterfly right in front of us, and I keep seeing them. And I laughed because I saw a group of butterflies, and my mom is super social. I did not get that from her, but I thought, she's already busy on the other side being social. So I just shared that because if you have lost someone, just remember they're in another form there, and look and be open to the messages that they might be trying to send. Another big announcement, I'm redoing Patreon. When I first did, I thought, the extra podcasts. As I've been figuring it out, I want to get paid. I'm not going to lie and say I don't. But what I realized was what I really hope for people to do is to take action and to move forward in their lives. I get these incredible emails, and they always make me excited when people say, you've helped change my life. I've listened. And sometimes we need a little more support than that. And so it's really about keeping it affordable. There'll be the $5 option. I'm tweaking now, but it's going to be ready to roll at the end of December. You'll see by the end of December, you'll see all of the updates, what the new and improved Patreon channel is going to do. So if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, or if you're new and you are ready to take action and change your life, that's what the focus is going to be. It's going to be not about the podcast. It'll be, I think, giving you a weekly assignment to begin with. And so I just share that. It's Declutter Your Life. I'll include a link in the podcast. Start doing that, but I hope to see you there. Again, if you're ready for change, if you've been listening for a while and say, now's the time, 2022 going to be my year. I've got to do something about this. Today's episode was inspired because I've had imposter syndrome. And then I was having a conversation with my husband, and I thought, he's so smart. And he got this promotion 2 years ago, and it's like, I don't know if I have the ability. And he's so amazing that I was like, wow, if you're feeling that, then, and I know I felt it, I know we're not alone. And when we were before we got married, Tony was in a townhouse, and he had redone a lot of it. It was beautiful. And we got an offer for someone, and they did a lot of sleuthing and tried to say because Tony had done it, it wasn't good enough. I mean, and talk about something that just, right to the heart, and said, you're not skilled. And of course, we didn't sell it to that person. And they kept coming back with offers because it was so gorgeous. And she's like, well, I'm obligated to tell you about an offer. And I said, well, we're never going to sell it to him. So just tell him to buzz off. And then later when we were selling the house that Tony moved in with me, the guy's like, wow, I would hire you to do floors. We just didn't have time. And so we hired someone to do some new floors. But as a wedding present, Tony had created this beautiful tile floor in the dining room with these patterns. And anyway, the guy's like, wow, you're really good at that. But he sometimes feels that imposter syndrome because he wasn't formally trained. The coaching program I did isn't the big international coaching federation or whatever, not one of the two big programs, but it was what I needed. And I bet you I've done more work on myself than any of the other top coaching programs, but that allows me to be the best person that I can be to support people. So even though it's not traditional, some people might say, well, or make you feel like, I've heard that, well, you didn't train with whatever. Well, that's great. Then find someone who did. If that's important to you, you've got to do what's best for you. But you can easily say, well, I didn't do this program, so I'm an imposter. And I know that's not true because I see the results. So that is what inspired today's episode. So first, what is imposter syndrome? I went to Wikipedia. Imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent, internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this phenomenon remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve all they've achieved. So then I found an article on Psychology Today, or I should say it's from their page. I believe they have a page on imposter syndrome. And it's estimated that 70% of people will experience at least one episode of this phenomenon in their lives. So you're not alone. That's another reason I want to do the episode. And they felt that 25 to 30% of high achievers may suffer from imposter syndrome. So I just shared that if you have an episode, don't freak out. It's pretty common. And so then I took some of this information from an article, What is Imposter Syndrome by Arlen Kunkik, that was updated on February 26, 2021. And it was medically reviewed. I was excited about this by Amy Morin, who's a licensed clinical social worker. And I had her on the show. She wrote a book, 8 Things That Mentally Strong People Do. And so if you have a chance, listen to that episode. So that was where I was great that someone with this background had reviewed it. So what are the characteristics? Self-doubt, of course, right? If you believe you're an imposter, you're doubting yourself. You also are challenged to realistically assess your competence and skills. I laugh. We all know people who will inflate their skills, but people with imposter syndrome can't gauge their skills the other way. They're really competent, but don't realize that. Saying my success came from external factors. Oh, I got lucky. Oh, or the 5 people that are better than me didn't compete, or whatever it is, right? So it has nothing to do with your skills and hard work. Berating your performance, right? Finding why it wasn't good enough and getting into that perfectionism trap. You also may have fears that you won't live up to expectations, yours or other people's. And I did an episode, Great Expectations. Check that out to go a little bit of a deeper dive. Overachieving can be a characteristic, right? Because you feel like an imposter, you're always gonna have to do better, always strive, always have those far-flung goals. You also might sabotage your own success. Have you ever done that? Like you sleep late and miss the client, or you fail to make it to the test, or you don't send the test results in. You might also set goals that are just about unrealistic and then give yourself a hard time when you fall short. If you have these going on for a long time, they can increase anxiety, and that could also lead to depression. And people who feel like imposter syndrome tend to not talk about it. That's one of the other reasons I want to do the show is, let's take some of the sting out of it. Let's take some of the shame out of it. And no, gosh, 70% of us have experienced at least one episode of this. That's a huge chunk. That's more than 2/3. Now, interestingly enough, some of the triggers, you might want to say, well, what could make this happen? If someone calls attention to your success, oh, no, and it might not be being humble, it might be more about imposter syndrome. You don't want anyone to acknowledge your success. And it's kind of ironic that here you are being complimented on your awesomeness, but that could increase your imposter syndrome. Or if you have some losses, right? You have a couple losses and you think, oh, it's all because of me. There are just so many things that are out of our control sometimes that it has nothing to do with your ability. I shared the story. I wrote a couple federal grants. Gosh, it's been maybe close to 15 years ago. And none of the grants that I got were funded. Well, I found out that they were USDA grants. And that year, the chairperson was from Maine. And guess what? Maine got a ton of them. I have no control over politics. It doesn't mean that I'm not a skilled grant writer. You might say because of that, it has something to do with me. Here are some questions that you could ask yourself. Are you very sensitive, super sensitive to criticism, even constructive criticism? Constructive criticism is a good thing. But if you're super sensitive to that, because then you're not going to be able to realistically take the goodness from that, and it starts you down that imposter syndrome road. Do you tend to downplay your expertise and your successes? Again, not being humble, it's because of this feeling like, wow, I'm really not that good. Are you caught in the perfectionist trap? Are you always pointing out your flaws and mistakes? Do you say, I just got lucky? Or it's again, external factors? Do you have this fear that you're going to be found out as a phony? Now, imposter syndrome, there are types, and they can show up in a couple different ways. So as I share these, see if any of these relate to you. Perfectionist. And I did an episode on perfectionism, so check that out. You're never satisfied with your work. Oh, I can do better. It's not a fun place to be. I used to be a perfectionist. It was never good enough. I would fixate on my flaws or mistakes or how it could have been better. The books are a great example. Like I had proofread, I had grammatical, I had content by 3 different people and then me, and they're still, and then I went back to them and there were still typos. And if you get a book, there's probably a typo in it now, but I had to choose, I need to get this material out. I need to support people. So I'm going to go ahead and do it and not stress about a typo. And if someone picks out a typo, good on you. I have to tell you, the other day it said it was a New York Times bestseller, it was mystery, love mysteries. And it had like 5 or 6 typos. And this was done by a publishing house. So I have to tell you, I was quite shocked by that because, you have a whole team and they're experts and doing all that. And I'm like, if a New York Best Times seller can have all those typos. And I just naturally, that's something I pick out. I can't tell you if the grammar is wrong, but if there's a typo, I'm going to catch it. It's just something that how I'm built. But then I was like, if a New York Times bestseller can have all those typos with a team, then you know what? I'm doing A-okay. Now, the article reviewed called this the superhero, but I wouldn't phrase it that way. I'd call it the 24/7 worker, because you feel inadequate. You're going to push yourself as hard as possible. Again, I talk about how before I met my husband, I used to work on my business 24/7. And I'm sure part of that was being fueled by imposter syndrome. Well, you're how old and starting your business? Well, what's your formal training in this? All of that stuff. So the 24/7 worker is just always going to be going and going and going and pushing themselves as hard as possible. The expert. I'm a fan of lifelong learning, but in this case, people are never satisfied with their level of understanding. And they're super skilled, they're highly skilled, and they underrate their own expertise, right? There's always more to learn. There's always more to learn. And they just don't honor that they're already pretty much an expert. Genius, I wouldn't have called it this, but that's what they use. You set excessively lofty goals and then feel crushed when you don't succeed at the first try, right? It's always good to shoot for the moon. What is that? Shoot for the stars and you might reach the moon. I'm a firm believer in that. But if it's going to fuel you feeling like an imposter, then that's not helpful. And then finally, the individual, which I think happens a lot here in America where I am. I know that I definitely fall into this category. I'm much better than I used to be, but prefer to work alone. And they link self-worth to productivity. So they offer rejection. Oh, I don't need any assistance. I don't need any help, because for them, needing help or asking for assistance is a sign of weakness or incompetence, right? That's one of the things I had to let go. It's like, I can do my website 90% of the time, 90% of it, but I am not competent. I need to hire someone else. It doesn't mean that I'm a loser, but that's just not my area of expertise. And so realizing that a team is what I need and not keeping it to myself.
Feel stuck, but have no clue what you need to do to move forward? Would you like to feel energized and excited every day? Are you ready to create the life you desire? Julie Coraccio supports you in finding the answers within and then taking action to make changes happen. Visit reawakenyourbrilliance.com to learn how Julie can support you with life coaching.
All right, so how do we overcome, right? We don't want to have imposter syndrome anymore. One of the first things I'm going to suggest is you talk about it, because as I mentioned a moment ago, people tend not to, right? They're embarrassed. Times say, hey, I feel like an imposter. No one's going to hire me for business, or they're not going to trust me. When we share our stories, one, it helps release shame, because there's shame about feeling like this. Well, 70% of us are feeling like this. We're not alone. And you might be surprised when you share your stories, how others open up. And you're like, wow, I would have never thought Susie Q would have had imposter syndrome. And when we share and are vulnerable, that allows us to all be supported and move forward. Make a realistic assessment of your abilities. I'm a firm believer of writing a list of all the awesome sauce things about you. And so when you're feeling down, you remember, oh, I accomplished this. I did that. But also having a self-assessment. So things I'm not good at. Doing taxes. I'm trying to think of what I pay people to do, like website design, fashion, interior decorating. I'm an okay cook and baker, and I don't farm that out. I'm trying to think of things that I do where I ask for support. Not good at accounting. I can barely balance my checkbook. So I know those are areas of weakness for me. And then I also know what are strong things: writing, speaking, decluttering, organizing, coaching. And I have a realistic idea of what my strengths and weaknesses are. So take the time to honestly assess it. And again, if you have imposter syndrome, you're not giving yourself enough credit. So get feedback from someone else, someone that you trust, someone that's not going to be judgmental. Be very delicate and smart about who you pick, because you don't want someone that might push you further into believing you're an imposter and a fake and a fraud and a phony when you really aren't. And there are also tests and assessments that can also give you really good feedback to find out what your skills are. Don't worry about what others say. How much of imposter syndrome is fueled by this? By social media comments, by people. I think the best rendition of God Bless America is by Whitney Houston. Boy, did that woman have a voice. And so someone posted it. I think it was at the Olympics or track and field. I think it was a sporting event. And she sang it. And wow, I got chills, just how phenomenal. And people on YouTube downvoted it, thumbs down. And they wrote comments how it wasn't good. And I thought, if Whitney Houston, probably one of the greatest singers of all time, in my view, the best version of, because my understanding is it's a technically difficult song to sing, can be criticized by people, I'm like, well, then what do I have to lose? Because then it's just not realistic. And again, I'm not saying, we have different tastes, different things that we prefer. You just might be like, I don't prefer her, and that's okay. But there's also a difference between not preferring and acknowledging the skills that have someone. So really think about that for a moment. How much is being fueled by yourself, and what part is the outside world playing? Take small actions. You defeat this imposter syndrome by not focusing on being perfect, but doing things reasonably well. You chunk it into small bits, and that gives you a sense of accomplishment, and that allows you to keep building and keep growing and keep moving forward. Question your thinking. Begin to think critically. Are these thoughts that I'm having rational? Is it really true that you're a fraud? I'm guessing that the majority of you are going to be like, nope, you're not a fraud, because you aren't. Right? You've just done this skills assessment. It says you are a really phenomenal Excel spreadsheet worker. That's another thing I have like basic skills in. I'm not very good at. So this test has just told you that you scored 99% on the super advanced Excel test. So does it make sense you say you don't do Excel very well? Not based on the skills assessment. So begin to question those thoughts as they pop up, and take a moment, stop. I'm not going to just stew on this, or I'm not going to, okay, no, that's not true. Remember, that's our ego. Your soul's not going to tell you that. Your ego is going to be, oh man, loser. Write down all the awesome skills and qualities about yourself. List your fears and what you've overcome in life. I've mentioned on more than one occasion, I was deathly afraid of public speaking, and now I get paid to speak. I was afraid to do so for my birthday this year. I am afraid of heights, and so I'm doing things to try to conquer that. So we did a ropes assessment, a ropes course, and what do you call them? Zip lining. Zip lining was the easiest part, but I would help with my fear of heights. I actually want to do it again. It helped me be like, I'm afraid to do this. And Tony, of course, was a rock star, but overcoming that fear, like that was a big deal. And I didn't quit. And there are people younger than me that quit. So it's just a reminder of all the things that I've overcome. So do one for yourself. Stop comparing. I did an entire episode on this. Every time you compare yourself to others in some type of situation, you're going to find some fault, and that is going to fuel the feeling of not good enough, of being incompetent. It's going to make you feel like a phony or fraud. So stop the comparison. Don't get caught up in that trap. Be like, I am me. I'm on my journey. I have these unique qualities. I have this unique experience. But good gosh, there are like a bazillion people that I'm not as good as Shakespeare. I'm not as good as, I don't know. I'm reading mysteries now. I can't think of. All right, Marie Kondo. That's a great example. She's, bazillion books. I haven't sold a bazillion books, but I also found out her husband's like a genius marketer. I'm like, now I feel so much better. He had a marketing machine, and it's not to take away anything from her talent or her ability, but let's just keep it real. You have to have some kind of marketing thing. It's very rare that you can just, even with the things that I haven't read, the 50 Shades of Grey, book clubs fell in love with her, and that drove her to success. So if I were to compare, I'm not in a book club, or I'm not at the Success Marie Kondo. But people who read my books probably aren't reading Marie Kondo, even though there's definitely a connection and a spiritual aspect to her stuff that I think is really grooving. But I don't want to get in the comparison trap. If I would compare myself to someone as internationally known, as successful as Marie Kondo, then I would just feel bad about myself, and I'd feel like a complete imposter. So stop comparing. Be aware of social media. I did an episode on this. Being on social media a lot can lead us to feel inferior. Of course, we're going to feel like an imposter, but so much of social media is fake. So if you're trying to portray this image of someone you're not, or if you're following a lot of people do, then that's going to make you feeling like a fraud worse, because you're going to be found out. It's like the people who Photoshop themselves in front of private planes and don't own private planes. Well, how are you going to feel when social media dumps on you after they find out it's a fake? Identify your biggest fans. Who loves you? I have a group of people that I have kept their emails. I've kept things they sent me. And if I'm feeling down, I pull those out. I'm really grateful. I have some super fans from the podcast that I just absolutely love and that I am honored and privileged to know. So figure out who your biggest fans are and who are your biggest family members. Like my husband supports me in everything. He's great. I have some other family members that are like, my mother was like that. You can do my grandmother. You can do anything you put your mind to. Identify your biggest fans and supporters. Don't hinge your identity to your success. Most people have this idealistic image of themselves. And when they fail to live up to that, then doubt starts to sink in, right? Or they attach their identity to something they do. So I did the international TV show and did on the internet, Reawaken to Brilliance. And for so long, and I didn't realize this, my identity was attached to the show. And it was hard for me to let go. But when I let go of that, I did the podcast, and the podcast I've been much more successful with, had much more of an audience that I did, but I had to let go of the show. But my biggest, there were some other things too, but one of the biggest challenges was, oh, but I identify with the show and I didn't have the courage to cut it off sooner because I thought I was my show. So be very aware of what you're identifying, what you're tying your identity to. Mistakes happen. They're a lesson. Don't dwell on them. We all make mistakes. Acknowledge it. See how you can do better and move forward. Don't make that doubt you. Oh, I did this. I mean, gosh, I've made tons of mistakes. I'm still making mistakes and I'll continue to make mistakes, but I learn from them and I don't let them stop me from moving forward. Just because I make a mistake, I'm not like loser. You know what? You should never organize a house again. Nah, not true at all. Not true at all. So just be aware of that and switch your thinking. It's a lesson. It's not a mistake. Now, again, if you truly do something horrible, but I would say unless you have ill intent from the beginning, if you have to apologize, own up to it and move forward. Forgive yourself. Don't waste time beating yourself up and choosing, because it's a choice to be miserable. Give yourself permission to move on. I wanted to be a screenwriter. It almost happened. And for a long time, I felt like a failure. I had to forgive myself and say, it's okay that your dream didn't happen, but that allowed me to develop new dreams. And the reality is, I can't imagine being my age now and living in Los Angeles. I would be miserable. And it was very hard being so far away from my family for a decade of my life. And I can't imagine, if my mom's sick, I don't know what I would have done if I'd been not within driving range. I don't know what I've done. So I've had to forgive myself when I'm not perfect, forgive myself when I mess up or make a mistake. So self-forgiveness is something just in general. It's very supportive, but when you can forgive yourself, you're going to lessen the feeling of feeling like an imposter. Surround yourself with supportive people, materials. Are you reading about how people face their fears or those who gave up? Are you listening to people say, yeah, you can do it. Let's create a plan how to get there. People say, it can't be done. You're too old. You're too fat. You're too this. Does your group cheer you on or silently wish you not to succeed? You can feel the vibration of people. You know what they're really thinking. It's like, I learned from that, bless your heart. I thought, oh, it's really nice. Bless your heart for Southerners is not a nice thing. But again, you say, bless your heart. You kind of get the vibe. Oh, okay. Now I get what they're saying. But just be really aware of who you are surrounding yourself with and what kind of materials you're reading and everything you're doing. Be positive. I'm not saying be Pollyannish, but if you're spending all your time on reading about failure instead of reading how to succeed, that is obviously going to influence you and make you feel like you're not good enough and an imposter. Let it go. To move forward from feeling an imposter, I've given you a bunch of examples. If you're like, wow, I have felt this, I feel it multiple times, I felt it for a long time, you're going to want to dig deeper. So ask yourself, what core beliefs do I hold about myself? Now, if you've listened, talk a lot about, I believe it boils down to feeling not good enough, worthy enough, or loved. So what are those core beliefs that you have that are fueling this? Do you believe you're worthy of love just as you are, of success just as you are, of friendship and abundance and all good things just as you are? Do you feel like, oh, I have to be XYZ before I can get this? Do you think that you need to be perfect for others to approve, to love, to be there for you? What is it that is driving that? What do you think you need to be in order to be accepted? So those are some questions to chew on. I know you've got this. You are not an imposter. We have those moments, but then you can move forward. Take action from today's podcast. Recognize where you have imposter syndrome. Ask yourself, what are my triggers and what characteristics do I have? Understand how you can overcome feelings of doubt. Dig deeper and examine any core thoughts and attitudes you may have. Know that you are good enough, worthy enough, and loved no matter what. On our next episode, we're talking about plant medicine. Go out, clear your clutter to create the life you choose, deserve, and desire. When you clear your clutter, you can share your gifts with the world. Sign up for our free newsletter at reawakenyourbrilliance.com. If you've enjoyed Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, please rate, review, and share us.